say that we as leaders are entirely too focused on action?
I think the whole population of the world is too focused on action. And there's an increasing movement towards self-awareness and all of that kind of thing. But look what's going on around the world. Huh? How many wars are going on? How many millions are being, oh, well, anyhow. You don't think that's coming out of awareness based in being, do you?
So, in Jim Farr's opinion, leaders aren't nearly as effective as they could be, in part because they don't realize that leadership is a psychological process, one that they need to understand in order to master. All motivation is self-serving, and we as leaders need to learn how to motivate others to want to do what we want them to do. Leadership is best observed in the workplace, and in our next conversation, Jim Farr provides valuable lessons from his experiences along the production line.
Motivation is the energy that causes humans to do whatever they do. All the power in a human organism, a human being, is within that person. You know how to get somebody to follow you? Go ask them to find out what they want, and then fix it so they get it by following you.
Hello, I'm Rick Amy. Let's say you do not like the quality of the product your company is producing and you want to improve it. How do you do that while following leadership expert Jim Farr's admonition that good leadership comes through good followership? As a start, as Jim has said, you should learn what your followers want and provide it so that they will choose to perform at the level that you desire. Let's look at that as we resume our interview with Jim at his North Carolina farm. Once again, he tells of his experiences in factories and businesses where he accepted the task of improving productivity and taught lessons in leadership simultaneously.
Three fundamental elements to how leadership works in an organization. First, there's what I call directional leadership. That is, if you've got a large number of people, somebody has to pick the goals and the paths and organize the flow to an objective. So that's directional leadership. Once you've decided, I always use the example of here we are lost in the woods, and we're going to starve to death if we don't find our way out. And then you come up with directional leadership. You say, I know that's the way to go. Well, fine, now we can all start that way. But then we discover there's a huge lake out there, a big body of water. We're stuck. And he says, well, that's right, I know how to build a boat. Now that's implementational leadership. You've got the goal set, but you now need leadership to set up the factories, organize the markets, or whatever it is. Well, he goes ahead and starts building the boat, but very shortly comes over and says it's hopeless. And everybody's fighting, they won't do what I tell them, and he says, wait a minute, I know how to lead the people. So that's interpersonal leadership. So every organization you need three: the directional, the paths, the goals, the implementational, the structure, the operations, and then the interpersonal to get the people to do it all.
And most certainly many businesses have one or two of those and not all three.
Well, basically what happens is most of leadership that I saw in organizations out there, practical ones, comes out of the implementational level. They're busy running the factories, setting up. There's such a great demand for things to do to make the organization run that you get a lot of input from implementational leading. I had a company that had 4 factories up in the Ozark Mountains. They made shirts. And again, they had about 2,000 people working there. And this was in the period when the Orient started competing, and all of a sudden there's an influx of shirts at a very low price. So he was finding himself getting locked out of the market because he couldn't meet the competitive costs. So he called me and said, I've got 2,000 people, either I get them to be more productive or I close the factory, fire them all, and buy my shirts from the Orient, and I'd rather not get rid of the 2,000 people. Can you help? And I had never tried it before, but I thought about it for a minute and said yes. And I agreed that we would set out to raise productivity 50%. Well, to get that productivity, now they incidentally were top of the line technologically. Their implementational, he'd been spending a fortune making.
But who set that 50% standard? Did you set that, or did they set that?
He figured that's what he needed to be profitable.
And you bought into that, and you agreed
Well,
to do
I
that.
went out and looked around, and I decided the way things were at the human level, a monkey could get progress out of the place. So I was willing to take a chance, so I said yes. Because the technology was beautiful. The operational setup was beautiful. And in one sense, and I'll talk about that later, the directional leadership, one aspect of it was good, another aspect of it was poor. But anyhow, I went into the plant, and I saw what had to happen. The only way we could get productivity up was if 2,000 people made more shirts. Now, they were all on direct incentives, so they were willing to make more shirts. They'd make more money. But it just didn't work out. Well, my assumption was that their leadership was such they didn't know how to lead and integrate this human element, so that's what I set out to do. And of course, again, what we did was set up an attitude survey. Now, you know, let me diverge for a second. One of the fundamental elements of leadership at the interpersonal level is creating and managing the force of motivation. Motivation is the energy that causes humans to do whatever they do. And if you're going to lead people, your job is motivating them to do what it is you need to be done. Well, one of the things you have to keep in mind about motivation, all the power in a human organism, a human being, is within that person. Nobody and nothing can make you do anything except you. I can put a gun up to your head and you can say you made me do it, but I put it up to his head and say do it, and he says no and I shoot him. That was his choice, but you decided to, you know, in the war trials, I did it because they ordered me to. They decided to accept the orders. Well, the point is, the only power in a human being is within the human being. And as a leader, you don't have any power over people. The people have the power, and your problem is to get them to delegate it to you, where they delegate the power over themselves and agree to follow you. They do that because they think there's a benefit in it for them, incidentally. And most management doesn't think of that. But at any rate, you get them to delegate the power to you. Now, they will delegate enough to keep their jobs automatically. They need it to live. They'll delegate it enough so that they don't feel too badly about themselves. I deserve my pay. But now when we wanted these people to increase their productivity and effectiveness 50%, what was called for was a lot more attention to details, much more effort on their part to figure out. They had to motivate themselves to try harder to produce more for the, well, that's the fundamental problem of leadership of people, is activating their motivation, which is their decision to follow, tying that to what you want done.
Which was the case in the shirt factory.
It's a case everywhere. Leadership is a psychological process. Part of the process is I must recognize, know how to activate, and get you to turn on your motivation down the path I want you to go.
So now, how did you help him and his staff figure out how to motivate the people?
Well, there's a rule of law about
shirts.
Motivation. All human behavior is motivated. There's no unmotivated behavior except random reflex stuff. And all motivation is self-serving. Could say selfish in many cases, but it's self-serving. You are always motivated to do that which you perceive will benefit you the most in the circumstances. You always pick the path that's best for you. So the leadership in that case was, how was I going to fix it so that these people would see what's best for them is producing more shirts more efficiently? Well, I had an easy way to go, and since they were on incentive, if they got 50% more shirts, they made 50% more money, which pointed to the second problem, which is they wanted to make more shirts and more money, but they didn't believe they could because circumstances were such that their experience said no matter how hard I try, it won't work, because the system hadn't been structured in such a way that it found out what was hindering you from doing it. Management, the 2,000 people, they didn't have a system for finding out from 2,000 people what would help you make more shirts, which might be just moving your machine 6 inches or whatever it happens to be. So anyhow, my approach was technological. They're directionally, they're set. Implementationally, they're doing well. What I have to do is change the interpersonal leadership so that all of these people produce more. Okay, had to start with the president. He got 900 people together in the first plant to get up and introduce this program and introduce me. And he got up there and he said, ladies, most of them were women, but ladies and gentlemen, we were very happy to announce the beginning of a new program that is going to make us the most profitable and effective plant in this state. And we are very happy to announce that we've hired Farr Associates to come and help do this. And I sat there and said to myself, oh.
Because?
I got up and I stood there and I looked around the room for 3 minutes. I said, you know, I'm a psychologist and I can read minds. And I just read 800 out of 900 minds said, who gives a damn? And they laughed and stood up and cheered. And I said, well, let me tell you why I think we're here and what we're about to do. What we want to do is get to working with you to figure out how to make this the best place in the state to work, to make it the best job we can make it, to make it as satisfying as possible for you all. And I know if that happens, they'll get the shirts they want to make. And they clapped. So the first thing I had done was, how am I going to activate their motivation? I turned it into a project for their benefit, which would serve the leaders' benefit. So I asked for volunteers, and I got so many I had to say, wait a minute. And I took the first line to be the project line. And in the first month, we got 34% increase just from that one group. Now, that's partly just because since I was paying attention, the company was paying attention, and they were more important. They were more eager, more active. They tried hard. Well, the next thing we had to do, if this is going to work, the leaders shape whatever happens in their outcome in there is a function of the leaders. It's a function of what they did or didn't do. It's their responsibility. So I knew I had to get the foremen and managers to lead in a manner which would begin to solve the problems that were interfering with productivity. One of them is motivation, which I've already mentioned. As soon as we get them involved, we're doing an attitude survey, they're being listened to, we responded to what they said, we got them involved in meetings to figure out how to solve the problems. All of this is getting their motivation tied to self-gain and ego fun and so forth. Then we had to get the foremen around to changing their mode of supervising. Instead of just giving orders and telling them what to do, we started training them in how to get work groups together and ask the people, what do we need to do? What will make it work better? What's interfering? And the people would come up with, well, if we did this, it would work. For example, they're sitting there sewing a bundle of shirts, and then they pass it on. And at that point, they need a new bundle. Well, they had what are called bundle boys that would get a bundle off the pile and give it to them. Well, one of the things the lady said was, one of the reasons we can't make full production is when I finish my bundle, I sometimes have to wait 5 minutes for a bundle from the bundle boy. So we looked into this and went around and asked, why does that happen? Well, the girls said it happens because the bundle boys favor those girls who let them pat them on the butt. And turned out this was true. They played favorites and so on. So anyhow, we organized the bundle boys into a problem-solving group about how are we going to maximize bundle of, and they did it. And we we organized what we call employee problem-solving groups. And one of them, for example, said, we can't get production because when one of our machines breaks down, it takes 45 minutes for maintenance to fix it. So we organized a group of the workers and the maintenance people together, and how do we get maintenance time down? We got it down to 15 minutes with everybody working on solving the problem. We had the motivation focused on it. They were getting ego rewards out of being asked and out of being heard and in solving it, and they're making more money. And they begin to be more friendly to each other. And instead of being angry at the maintenance person because it took 45 minutes, they're declining. Anyhow, in 8 months, we got 43% increase in productivity. We also got turnover dropped from 35% down to 4 or 5%.
So it sounds to me like this is a good case study for motivational leadership, psychological leadership, which is the point that you're trying to make.
And what it illustrated, what I'm illustrating now is that the leadership was seen as a psychological process to think, how do we lead in a manner which engages their perceptions, their problem solvings, their cooperation, their motivation, and their work activity.
Instead of imposing it from
Instead
on
of
high.
coming and saying, here's your machine, here's your seat, sit down and sew, which is what they had been doing.
Now, wasn't there a fair amount of labor involved in being able to turn this around and do it the way that you did it? Doesn't this take management more time managed this way?
Well, we had constant, yes, but what else have they got to do besides lead? We had constant training for the supervisors. Now, what happened is the supervisors started running these groups and their lines started getting better. They loved it. They got motivated to do more of it. As a matter of fact, what happened is we got, there were 40-some lines there. We had about 13 lines going. And the other remaining lines got very angry and went to management and said, it's not fair. When are we going to have this in our lines? So it worked well.
It would seem to me that there's a real art to this, getting motivated followers to do what you, the leaders, want. That the tendency would be much more.
The psychological skills of leadership. The foreman, they had to learn to listen. They had to learn to ask questions and find out where you are. They had to give up the power of authority and be willing to ask the people, how do we solve the problem? And then they had to respond and listen to them. That's big psychological changes in leadership style.
Could a company learn that on its own, or would it have to turn to a
Sure, they
consultant?
could learn it on their own, but by and large, human minds get set in a path that's working. It takes a bulldozer to change it, so they don't usually change on their own. On the other hand, they did change on their own. The president looked and said, what we're doing isn't working. We need to change it, and brought us in. They made the change. They didn't know the technology for carrying it out, but the president did set a new directional leadership input, which was, we're going down this road, come and show us how.
Isn't there a danger that if you don't know how to do this well, and once you try to start this process of employee involvement, that you could be opening a Pandora's box?
Yes, if you try to do it well and you do an attitude survey and they tell you all their problems and you don't go out and figure out how to fix them, they're going to be more angry than they were before they were sure you knew they didn't like it.
Which is yet another reason why companies would be somewhat reticent to go in this direction.
If management thought they knew how to do it, I don't think they'd be. If the leaders saw it and thought they knew how to do it, most leaders I saw out there try to do their best, and they are doing their best. They're doing the best they know how.
So if I'm a leader watching this program right now and I'm hearing that I need to look at the telescope through the other end, instead of looking at it as something that I impose, it's rather something that I have to draw out from my people, and I want to learn how to do this, how do I go about doing that?
Well, and this, about 3 months ago, the Harvard School of Business journal came out saying our prediction for the major growth development in the next 10 years in the science of management is going to be the development of awareness training, self-awareness, and psychological management thereof. There's all kinds of, this is a very rapidly evolving thing out there of training people in self-awareness and communication and the psychological processes of motivation.
You have to go through the awareness before you can get to the psychological motivation approach?
No, there's a whole behavioral technology that you can learn. Actually, the awareness training is mostly required at the level of the leaders. They need it if they're going to use themselves, this complicated. They really need to understand their machinery, and if they're going to influence you, they need to know yours. The followers out on the line, they don't need to be put through awareness training, but they need to be managed with much more effectively in terms of the psychological processes of perceiving, relating, being motivated, trusting, being loyal, or on the other end, being angry, being disgusted, being hopeless.
Would this model apply to every company, the psychological motivation approach?
If they have people. Well, where it wouldn't apply is where nobody wants to be there, and they're forced to. It probably wouldn't work too well with a prison group who didn't want to be there anyhow. But even there, if you could make it more fun and more ego satisfying, it probably work there. Basically what's involved in this, there's maybe two basic things in it. One of them is leading in a manner where following is more satisfying. People follow for their own gain, and if you make following you more satisfying, they will follow you faster and harder. So how do I make it more satisfying for you to be a good worker in my plant? Well, we've gone through the whole thing of job enrichment, employee empowerment, participation in problem-solving teams, all of which is ego rewarding and so on. So that the other thing that's needed, there's a whole psychotechnology that leaders don't understand.
Well, this is all leading us into something that we've been touching on in bits and pieces all along, which is leadership is really followership. And, and that's where the power really lies.
I put that differently. Leaders spend time getting trained and working, and they do research trying to figure out how to develop leadership. Well, what leadership is whatever causes you to follow. Therefore, we don't want to develop leadership, we want to develop followership. If you want to learn how to be a leader, go study followers. Now, there's one part of leadership that's you have to learn how to create the machinery and think out that cognitive part of the leadership. But in terms of the people side, if you want to learn how to be a good leader, go find out how followers. You know how to get somebody to follow you? Go ask them, find out what they want, and then fix it so they get it by following you. Therefore, if you want to get the highest level of followership, figure out how followers operate, what their needs are, how they tick, how they respond, and do that. You know what a good leader is? Somebody who knows how to do what he's told by his followers. Find out what they want and do it.
And so followers, whether we as leaders would like to hear it or not, give us the power that we have. They delegate it to us. We must learn to tap into that power with an approach that convinces them to want to follow the path that we lay out before them. We have said that you should strive to understand those who follow you in order to lead them well. And even more important to mastering leadership is understanding yourself. And that is next in our conversation with Jim Farr.
You know, the fundamental mechanism of leadership is creating and managing feedback loops. I say leading people without knowing what's in their minds is like in a war running across a field that's got mines in it without going out with a mine detector. I've been in plant after plant, in place after place, where getting a 10-15% increase is nothing.
Hello, I'm Rick Amy. Let's say you do not like the quality of the product your company is producing and you want to improve it. How do you do that while following leadership expert Jim Farr's admonition that good leadership comes through good followership? As a start, as Jim has said, you should learn what your followers want and provide it so that they will choose to perform at the level that you desire. Let's look at that as we resume our interview with Jim at his North Carolina farm. Once again, he tells of his experiences in factories and businesses where he accepted the task of improving productivity and taught lessons in leadership simultaneously.
Let me give you an example of, there was this company that they made polyolefin film, the kind of stuff you wrap in cigarette packages or bread or whatever. And they had a 6.7% reject rate, when a sister plant had a 0.05. And they'd been trying for 7 years to get this reject rate down and couldn't do it. And they said it was because there was something wrong with the die at the point where the stuff came into the operation, had an error rate in it, so that the error rate just went through. This is a bunch of engineers and their reasoning. And it didn't work. So finally one day the vice president said, Farr, you go fix it. I said, okay, I'll try. And he went, what? I said, what? I'll go down and see the possibility that it's not a technological problem, it's a human system problem. So I went, and I go down to Virginia where the plant was, and the vice president told him the shrink is coming. So I go there, and I go into the meeting, and there's 13 managers sitting around the table, and I say, hey, I'm Dr. Farr here. And so the manager said, well, I'll tell you frankly, we don't want you here. And I said, okay, tell me about that. He said, well, we got busy enough, we're busy enough already trying to solve this problem. It's a technological problem, and we don't need to go through all this. And I said, well, are you sure it's all technical? What if it's 15% human? Would it be worth fixing that? And he said, well, yes, but it's not worth the time and energy in light of the size of the problem. And this went on for a while. And I said, well, very well, thank you. I will go back and tell Vice President Johnson you don't want to do this. And I started out the door, and so he said, wait a minute, just a minute, wait a minute.
You misunderstand.
So anyhow, they decided to let me go out and do a preliminary to see. I went out and I interviewed 100 people, and I found 49. I asked them, is there a quality problem? Yes. Do you want to solve it? Lord, yes, they're always bugging us. Is it technological, or could it be people? Anybody said it was people, I said, give me an example. And I had 49 of them. So here I was down here at what is a machine that's called a slitter. And I was looking at it, and they had 4 knives on there cutting up into 5 product sizes. And I looked at it, and I noticed that the cutting distribution was such that really it was 4 pieces. All 4 pieces were going to be rejected, because they have to have uniform ends, and one knife was on a gauge band, and next in a pucker and a gauge band, which meant the ends wouldn't be uniform. And I said to the operator, I said, hey, do you know all 4 of these are going to be rejected because of the... He said, yeah, I know it, Doc. And I said, well, do something. He said, look, a while back I went to the foreman and told him that one of these distributions, and he told me that if he wanted my advice, he'd ask for it, run the machine. So I went to the foreman and said, hey, do you know all 4 of those are going to be? And he said, yeah, I know it. And I said, well, what's this? Why don't you do? He said, sometime back I went, these cutting distributions come down from customer service. I went to customer service and said I thought we could set up a system where we could do the cutting distributions more effectively. And they told me that if they wanted my help, they'd call me. So he said, I then went to the quality control and said, isn't there a way you could flag these rolls so we could do... And they said, yes, but we tried to set this up with customer service, and they told us to run our shop and they'd run theirs. So to hell with them. Well...
You took this back to the management and told them about it?
That was one of 49 such
49 examples.
Within 2 months, they got it down to 5%, 0.05. It was mostly all human.
All due to a lack of any consideration for the followers of the
What kind
plant.
of psychological things were missing? The workers had no participation in how to do the job, how to set the job, no mechanisms for communicating the little tiny problems that the engineers would never see, but they're like grains of sand in the machine. You get enough grains of sand and things... The workers had no way to say that if we changed this a little, it would go faster. Interface problem. This one, like the interface between quality control and customer service. There was no communication connection built between those two so that they could do feedback on what was wrong and what was right and come to a connection. You know, every in a complex operation like that, you have customer service, servant, customer server, customer servers chains all the way through the plant. What I do in this department to serve yours can make you more or less effective. But no communication links to give feedback.